Okay, let's dive into this. So this past Monday, something pretty interesting happened.
Right, the Blue Origin flight.
Exactly, with Katy Perry and five other, very accomplished women. And what really stood out, I think, for a lot of us
Mm.
was this being the first all-female space flight in, what, over 60 years?
Yeah, a long time. It definitely makes you stop and think.
It really does. And it brings up these fundamental questions, doesn't it? Like, who actually gets to go to space now in this sort of new era?
And what does it cost? That's the big one for most people, I imagine.
Precisely. So that's what we want to dig into today. We've got some great articles, thanks to you, our listeners. And the goal is really to get a handle on the accessibility and, yeah, the cost of civilian space travel right now.
Hmm.
So, if you've ever looked up at the stars and wondered, could I actually do that someday? Well, stick around.
Absolutely. And this flight, especially with, such recognizable names, it does feel like a bit of a shift, doesn't it?
A shift how?
Well, away from just governments, NASA, that kind of thing. It's broadening out, but it's complicated. There are layers to it.
Okay.
The info we have gives us a good starting point, though. Not just the spectacle of it all, but the nuts and bolts, how you'd even try to book a flight, the money involved.
Right. So let's get into the specifics of this flight then. It launched 9:31 a.m. Eastern Time from West Texas.
That's right. And it wasn't like a long trip up there staying in orbit or anything.
No, not at all. We're talking, what, about 11 minutes total?
It's just about 11 minutes, yeah. Which sounds short, but it's enough time to get past that Karman line.
The boundary of space, basically.
Exactly. About 60 miles or 100 kilometers up, you get that brief period of weightlessness, see the curve of the Earth. That's the experience.
And it's pretty much the same kind of flight profile others are offering, right? Suborbital.
Yep, that's the current model for this kind of space tourism.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this crew, this all-female crew, besides Katy Perry, who else was on board?
Well, there was Lauren Sanchez, Jeff Bezos' fiance, as I think most people know.
Right.
Gail King, the CBS host. Aisha Bowe, who's actually a former NASA rocket scientist, which is, wow, quite the background.
Definitely.
Then Amanda Nguyen, a scientist, and Carrie-Anne Flynn, a film producer. So, yeah, quite a mix.
A really diverse group, professionally
Yeah.
speaking. And the spacecraft itself, Blue Origin's New Shepard, that's their main vehicle for these tourist flights.
That's the one. It's designed specifically for these shorter suborbital hops, holds up to 6 passengers.
Okay.
And it's reusable, the rocket system is, which is, a pretty big factor in trying to make these flights more, well, frequent eventually.
And how many people have actually flown with Blue Origin now?
With this flight, the total count is up to 58 people since they started flying civilians back in 2021.
58. Still feels like a very small number, globally speaking.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly exclusive still.
But, okay, the information we looked at does mention, sort of hypothetically, how someone might try to book a flight. There's a reservation page on their website.
Yeah, theoretically, anyone over 18 can go online, find the reservation form. You put in your basics, name, address, birth year.
Standard stuff.
But then it gets interesting. They ask for a 500-word description about yourself.
500 words, just to, signal interest.
Apparently so.
Right.
It suggests they're not just taking the first people who sign up, maybe. They want to know who you are.
Huh. That's more involved than booking a regular airline ticket, that's for sure. Makes you wonder what they're actually looking for in that description.
It does, doesn't it? It hints that maybe it's not purely first come, first served, or just about the money. Perhaps they're looking for people with certain stories or, I don't know, influence.
Interesting. And then comes the next step, which definitely brings us back to the money aspect.
Ah, yes. The deposit.
$150,000 fully refundable deposit, just to start the order process.
$150,000. Yeah. Even if you get it back if things don't proceed. That's a massive barrier right there for almost everyone.
It really is. That number alone tells you who this is currently aimed at, doesn't it?
It puts it firmly out of reach for the vast majority. It signals the kind of financial league you need to be in to even have the conversation.
Which leads us straight to the million-dollar question, or maybe multi-million-dollar question. What's the actual price tag? Because the info suggests Blue Origin is kind of cagey about that. They don't just list a price online.
No, they don't. Which seems, quite deliberate. It gives them flexibility, maybe. They can perhaps adjust pricing based on demand or who's asking.
Could be. But we do have some numbers to work with from the sources.
We do. That very first crewed flight they did back in 2021, remember the auction?
Yeah. One seat went for $28 million. Is that right?
$28 million. That was the figure reported at the time. An incredible amount.
Mind-boggling for an 11-minute trip.
Now, granted, that was a charity auction, so you could argue it's not a standard market price. Bidding wars, publicity, it might inflate things.
True, good point. But still, it set a kind of benchmark, didn't it? Like, wow, people will pay that much.
It definitely showed the initial demand and the, let's say, perceived value among those who could afford it.
Okay, so that's one data point, albeit maybe an outlier.
Mm-hmm.
What about their competitors? We saw figures for Virgin Galactic.
Right. The reports mentioned Virgin Galactic's pricing being somewhere in the range of $200,000 up to $450,000 per seat.
Okay, so still obviously very, very expensive, but significantly less than $28 million.
Exactly. It gives us maybe a more realistic ballpark for what these suborbital flights might generally cost, somewhere in the hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars, still a staggering sum for most. But here's where it gets even more interesting, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that not everyone on these flights actually pays that kind of money. The guest flyers.
Ah, yes. That's a key part of the story. We saw those high-profile examples, like William Shatner.
Captain Kirk himself.
Right. And Michael Strahan, too. They reportedly flew for free as guests of Blue Origin.
So it's not just about having deep pockets then.
Apparently not. Which makes you wonder, okay, how do you get picked to be a guest? Is it just being famous? Good PR for the company.
That would be my first guess, yeah.
Well, we saw that quote from Roman Chaparuka. He's from a company called Space VIP. He had an interesting take.
What do you say?
He suggested it's not only about the money, but also about social capital and how well someone fits with the purpose of that specific launch. He called it a package deal.
Social capital. So like your influence, your network, maybe the story you bring.
That seems to be the implication, that those things can be as valuable or maybe even more valuable in some cases than just the cash for the ticket.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just writing a check. It's also who you are. That really changes the picture.
It adds a whole different layer, doesn't it? And then there was that specific report about this flight, the one with Katy Perry.
Right, what did that say?
A CNN report indicated that some passengers on that flight flew for free. It didn't say who.
Oh, okay.
And apparently, Blue Origin declined to comment on who paid and who didn't.
Keeping it quiet.
Yeah.
But it confirms the guest thing is ongoing, even on this latest high-profile flight.
Exactly. It reinforces this idea of sort of multiple tiers of access. You've got the people who can afford the ticket, whatever it costs, maybe auction winners if they do that again. And then this other group, the selected group, who are invited based on, well, other criteria.
So let's try and summarize the ways in then. Path 1. You're incredibly wealthy and just buy a ticket.
Or at least put down the huge deposit and get through the process, yeah.
Path 2. Maybe there's an auction you could win if you're wealthy and lucky.
Possibly based on that first flight.
Path 3. You get invited. You're a guest. And that seems to depend on your public profile, your social capital, maybe your connections.
That seems to be the current landscape based on what we're seeing. It's this mix, this kind of juxtaposition of extreme wealth being required for some. Right. And this other almost curated access for others. It's not just a simple buy a ticket, get on board system like a normal airline.
No, definitely not. That financial barrier is just immense for, 99.9% of people. But then you have this possibility of flying for free based on who you are, essentially.
Which introduces all sorts of questions about influence, value, how access is determined when it's not just about money.
Yeah. And when you think about the whole space tourism industry sort of growing, what does this tell us?
Well, it highlights this sort of tension, doesn't it, between the dream of opening up space, making it more accessible.
Yeah, the rhetoric you sometimes hear.
Right. And the current reality, which is, well, it's accessible if you have hundreds of thousands of dollars or if you happen to be someone they want on the flight for other reasons.
Social cachet, PR value.
Exactly. Those other forms of value, influence, standings, story, they seem to be playing a really significant role in who gets to go on these early flights.
So it's definitely still a very, very exclusive club, just with maybe a couple of different doors to get in.
That's a good way to put it. And both doors require something pretty extraordinary, whether it's immense wealth or significant public recognition.
It really makes you think about the future, doesn't it? Is this just how it's going to be?
Yeah.
A playground for the super rich and the super famous?
Or, as the technology hopefully gets cheaper, more routine, Will other ways to participate emerge? Will it ever become truly democratized? That's the big question mark, I think.
It is. The tech is moving fast, flights are happening more often, but who gets on board? That seems like it's still evolving and maybe not entirely transparent.
Very much in flux. Far from buying a ticket on EasyJet, that's for sure.
Yeah, just a bit different. Well, okay, this has been really fascinating, actually. Taking that all-female flight as a starting point and digging into the realities behind it. We've looked at the flight itself, the theoretical booking process, the potential costs, which are huge, and then this whole other angle of being an invited guest.
Yeah, it paints a picture. The dream of space travel is becoming real for some, definitely. But how you get there, it's complicated. And still heavily weighted by factors beyond just wanting to go.
So maybe the final thought to leave everyone with as they mull this over is thinking about that mix. You've got the massive cost on one hand and these selective invites on the other.
Right.
What does that really suggest about the future?
Yeah.
Is space access just going to be about who has the most money? Or are these other kinds of capital, social standing, influence, maybe even the right story, going to be just as important or even more important for getting your ticket to the stars?
It's definitely something to watch as this whole civilian space thing keeps developing. Is it wealth, or is it something else that gets you off the planet?
A fascinating question. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.